Hello and welcome to the Endurance Science Podcast. The aim of this podcast is to cut through the noise and misinformation that social media presents us and discuss what the science really says about endurance performance. My name is Matt Carpenter. I'm a lecturer in sports science at the University of Northampton, just coming towards the end of my PhD, looking at endurance exercise, particularly supplements and nutrition around endurance exercise performance. And now, today's episode, I want to discuss a supplement that you may not have heard of. But the point of this podcast isn't the supplement itself. It's more about the dangers of overhype within the supplement industry and why it's so important to not get too hung up on mechanisms and to wait for the human outcome data before we start recommending supplements to people. This is the main reason why I'm so cautious when I recommend supplements, and the evidence base has to be so big. And the story of this supplement gives a really good, clear picture as to why that is. And hopefully, if you can come out of this podcast with a bit of a protective shield around the hype of supplements, then we've succeeded. This is why there are many supplements that I am really interested in and I think could well be benefiting performance that I don't yet talk about because there simply isn't the evidence yet, and it's important to run before you walk. And this supplement is a great example or case study as to why we've got to be so cautious. And the supplement I'm going to talk about is Rapamycin. Now, Rapamycin has been huge in the longevity world for a long time now. It's been sold as a bit of a miracle drug. Podcasters, biohackers, the billionaires of the globe, and even quite a lot of doctors have been saying that this is the closest thing we have to a real life longevity drug. It's a pill you take once a week with the promise from many of slowing down aging and extending your lifespan. But a very big spanner has just been thrown in the works with the publication of a new trial. And so in this episode, I'm going to talk about the story of Rapamycin, what it is, the mechanisms behind it and why everyone got so excited, and how this new study changed the way people see it. But the reality is that this study shouldn't have changed anything because people shouldn't have been recommending this in the first place. We didn't have the human data ready. Now we do, and it's clear, based on this data, that we shouldn't be recommending it to most otherwise healthy people. So what is Rapamycin? So if you haven't heard of Rapamycin before, then I'll tell you that this is a really cool story and it's a genuinely interesting supplement. Back in the 1960s, a Canadian expedition went to Easter Island, a remote island in the Pacific known for giant stone heads. The island is called Rapa Nui in its local language. And whilst they were there, researchers were collecting soil samples. And in one of those samples, they found a bacterium that produced a compound with some remarkable properties. And they named that Rapamycin. Straight away, it was noticed by scientists that it had antifungal properties. They realized it was a powerful suppressor of the immune system. And so for a long time, Rapamycin, also known by its medical name sirolimus, has been used in transplant medicine to prevent organs from being rejected. So if you've had a kidney transplant, there's a reasonable chance that you've taken or been on Rapamycin. But here's where it starts to get interesting, particularly for people that are interested in health, exercise and longevity. In the early 2000s, scientists started to figure out how Rapamycin actually works inside our cells. And it turns out it inhibits something called mTOR. Now, mTOR is a mechanistic target of Rapamycin, named after the drug itself. And this tells you how central this discovery was. mTOR is a master regulator inside our cells. It senses nutrients, growth factors, energy, and tells the cell whether to grow or whether to clean, whether to break down old damaged components or whether it should be breaking down old damaged components in a process called autophagy. Now what's interesting is that mTOR actually has quite a lot of relevance to endurance exercise. It's the mTOR complex that drives muscle protein synthesis and growth, and so it's activated by resistance training. But where it becomes interesting for endurance athletes is that there's a bit of an antagonism between mTOR and AMPK. AMPK promotes mitochondrial biogenesis and fat oxidation, all these beneficial aerobic adaptations, whereas mTOR builds and maintains muscle. So when AMPK is high, it suppresses mTOR. AMPK is high during things like fasted training or low carbohydrate training. This is why things like train low strategies can enhance mitochondrial adaptation. But there's an argument that they compromise muscle maintenance. Anyway, this takes us back to Rapamycin. And so when researchers gave Rapamycin to mice, the mice lived much, much longer. We were talking up to 20-25% increases in lifespan in some research. And now almost anything seems to increase the lifespan of a mouse in research, but 25% is a huge finding. And so it had respected scientists saying that this may be the most robust pharmacological intervention for extending lifespan that we've ever found. And from this, the hype began, and the hype really never died off until this new study came out that I'm going to talk about. I started to get interested in health and exercise longevity during my master's degree 10 years ago now. I came across rapamycin straight away. The hype was there in 2015, 2016. It's still there to this day, or at least as of about a month ago. There are YouTube videos with millions and millions of views, podcasts dedicating multi-hour episodes to rapamycin. Influential figures in technology, longevity circles were talking about openly taking about it, with off-label prescriptions skyrocketing. Particularly in America, there are now entire telehealth clinics whose business is prescribing rapamycin to healthy people who are using it as a longevity pill. It's estimated that there are tens of thousands of people in the US alone taking rapamycin off-label. And in the UK, this number is expected to be in the low thousands. Small, but not insignificant. But here's the thing we need to come back to. Mice are not humans, and a drug that extends lives in mice is likely to not do the same thing in humans. And importantly, what almost no one had done was a properly designed, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of rapamycin with the one intervention that we know works for aging healthily, which is exercise. And that is what this new study did. And before we get to the trial itself, I need to explain one quick concept because it's really important to understanding what the researchers were actually testing. This is called the cycling hypothesis. So exercise, especially resistance training, works by activating mTOR, that mechanistic target of rapamycin. So when you squat, you lift weights, or as an endurance athlete, hopefully you do your plyometrics, more to come on that in the future weeks, your muscles get a signal to say, build, grow, get stronger. It's that mechanistic feedback loop that allows adaptation to occur. That signal runs through mTOR. So if rapamycin inhibits mTOR, then is there not a case that rapamycin could actually block the benefits of exercise? And in fact, that's exactly what older studies in rodents and young men have shown, that if you give a big enough dose of rapamycin and then you exercise, the muscle building response gets shut down. Now, this is likely not a great outcome if you're trying to age healthily. We know that building and maintaining muscle is one of the most important predictors of longevity, but also healthy aging. And so blocking that signal may well even impede the aging process, theoretically. And so here the longevity community came up with a fairly smart workaround. And the idea was cycling rapamycin. So what if you only take rapamycin 1 day a week on a non-training day? So on your training days, your mTOR is free to help you with building muscle. And then on your rest days, the rapamycin kicks in to promote autophagy, that cellular cleaning up process, and then potentially confer all these longevity benefits. The idea here is that you get the best of both worlds. You build a muscle when you're training, and then you clean out the cells whilst you're resting. So this was the cycling hypothesis of rapamycin. It sounded great. So great, in fact, that lots of people just started doing it without any clinical research, any trials doing it, because in theory, it sounded like a good idea. And this is a story that's so common in the world of supplements. Something that sounds good on paper and you can rationalize it in some way, and then people just start doing it and the hype takes over. The influencers start doing it and it becomes commonplace in the world of exercise without any good research being done. People just start swallowing pills on the idea that it should work. And so a team of researchers led by Dr. Brad Stanfield, who also has his own very popular YouTube channel with over 300,000 subscribers, in which he discussed rapamycin extensively, he chose to study this phenomenon, the role of rapamycin, and they decided to test it properly in humans with a placebo control and with rigorous outcome measures. And what they found in this study has made a lot of previously rapamycin enthusiasts quite uncomfortable. And so let's break down what they did, because the design here really matters. They recruited 40 sedentary older adults aged between 65 to 85, with an average of about 72. And to qualify for this study, you had to be genuinely sedentary, so doing less than 15 minutes of moderate exercise 3 times per week. So these were exactly the kind of people who we know will benefit the most from exercise. And here the participants were split randomly into 2 groups of 20. One group received 6 milligrams of sirolimus, that's rapamycin, once per week. The other group received an identical looking placebo capsule. And this was double blind, meaning that neither the participants nor the people running the trial nor the people measuring the outcomes knew who was getting what. Okay, and this is the gold standard because it eliminates any kind of wishful thinking or bias from both the researchers, but also, just as importantly, the participants themselves. And both groups went through the exact same exercise program, 3 days a week at home for 13 weeks. And there were two parts to this program. One was resistance training using chair stand exercises, so standing up from a chair as many times as you can for 30 seconds. The other was cardio on things like stationary bikes. And over these 13 weeks, they gradually built up from 10 minutes at low resistance to 25 minutes at slightly higher resistances over the course of the trial. And this is where the cycling hypothesis came in. The rapamycin dose was scheduled for day 6 of the week, about 24 hours after the final exercise session. The idea was to give the drug a chance to act during the rest period and then clear out before the next training week. And the important thing to note here is that this was almost a proof of concept in the fact that they created these perfect scenarios for rapamycin to hopefully work alongside exercise. And this was done by someone who previously had spoken very positively on rapamycin. And they also measured things like grip strength, 6-minute walking distance, quality of life score, inflammation markers, and even the epigenetic age clock, this being a DNA-based test that tries to measure biological age. And this trial was funded through mainly crowdfunding through Lifespan.io and VitaDAO. So this wasn't a pharma-based study, it wasn't even from the supplement industry, it was essentially the longevity community paying to find the truth about a drug they were already taking or at least interested in. So what did they find? Well, importantly, both groups improved. The important thing, or most important thing, is that we saw again, as we have thousands of times, that exercise conferred many health benefits to sedentary elderly population. Both groups got stronger, both groups improved their chair stand performance. The placebo group went from being able to do about 14 chair stands in 30 seconds to about 21, and the rapamycin group went up from 14 to about 17 or 18. And so everyone benefited from the exercise program. So exercise again and again and again proves itself to be the most reliable thing we have for improving function in older adults. But the headline from this study was that the rapamycin group improved less. And if we start to dig into the numbers, we can see that the rapamycin group did about 2 fewer chair stand repetitions at the end of the trial compared to placebo. So people that took the drug as prescribed and did the exercise as prescribed got less out of their training than people who did the same exercise with the placebo. And the other functional measures all pointed in that same direction. 6-minute walk distance, the placebo group walked about 5 meters further on average, though this wasn't statistically significant. Grip strength, placebo group was about 1 kilogram stronger, and quality of life scores all starting to favour the placebo. And then you have the research on the safety of rapamycin. Now, both groups had a similar number of participants reporting at least one side effect, so 17 out of 20 in each arm. But the total number of adverse events was quite different. The rapamycin group had 99 total adverse events, whereas the placebo group had 63. 3%. So 57% higher rates of adverse events in the rapamycin group. Now, most of these were mild, things like headaches, fatigue, upper respiratory symptoms, but it all adds up to a picture that rapamycin might not be the elixir that it was sold as. But there was one slightly concerning serious medical event with one participant in the rapamycin group developing community-acquired pneumonia, ending up in hospital overnight on intravenous antibiotics and steroids and had to withdraw from the trial. Now, you've always got to be careful in these fairly small studies with just one participant, but you've got to remember that rapamycin is essentially an immunosuppressant. That's why it's used in transplant medicine. So a serious infection in someone taking an immunosuppressant is a correlation that you can't just dismiss. And the exploratory measures in this study didn't help rapamycin's case either. The epigenetic age clocks, which are supposed to measure biological aging, showed either mixed or non-significant results. Inflammation was higher in the rapamycin group, although that was driven by a couple of outliers, and so that may well have ended up as no effect. Again, no benefits from rapamycin. And so there was nothing in this trial that suggested or supported the idea that rapamycin was conferring some kind of longevity benefit. And so to summarize, rapamycin did not enhance the benefits of exercising, and if anything, it seemed to modestly blunt the effects of exercise. It increased the burden of side effects, and it may have contributed to a serious infection. And that is the full picture from this fantastic study published only a month or so ago. Now, this comes with a really important caveat, which is the study design itself. It was very strong, but there was only 40 participants, 20 in each group. So it is a small study. The researchers themselves call it exploratory. So it was designed to test large effects, and it wasn't going to pick up small, tiny benefits here or there. The question wasn't, does rapamycin do anything subtle? The question was, could it do something big? And the answer, unfortunately, was no. So why does this matter for everyone? Well, it's very unlikely anyone listening to this has taken or considered taking rapamycin. But the point of the story I've just told isn't really about rapamycin itself. It's about hype in the supplement industry. And rapamycin's hype was pretty specific to the longevity community, but there's no difference in the hype we see within longevity to the hype we see within sports science, cycling, running, and supplements around endurance exercise. It's the same process of largely online influencers pushing, promoting untested or loosely tested products. Peptides are a huge one right now. I'm getting asked about them all the time. Very similar story. And it's not until it's often too late that we find out that it's either doing nothing or potentially even conferring harm. Now, we need to be careful not to overcorrect, and the researchers themselves note the limitations of their trial. Clearly, it was a short trial using home-based bodyweight resistance rather than gym-based lifting. The dosing schedule might not have been optimal, and all these kind of things. Maybe a less frequent dose would have yielded different results. We don't know. But here's what we do know, is that for years, rapamycin has been promoted to healthy adults as something close to a miracle drug. People have been paying loads of money to take this barely tested supplement because of theoretical mechanistic benefits. Influential voices on social media have been taking it themselves and recommending it with minimal caveats. And then when the first properly randomized control trial comes out, we see that it either has no effect or potentially causes more side effects. Now, this isn't saying rapamycin itself is useless. There may well be settings where there are benefits, different doses, different schedules, different populations, but we just don't know. What this study really showed was the gap between what we think will work based on plausible mechanisms and animal data and small uncontrolled trials, and then what actually works when we test it properly in humans. And this gap is just as big within exercise performance as it is in longevity. This is why over the last 10 or 15 years, there have been new magic supplements coming out over and over and over again. But actually, when you start to look at evidence, it's the same ones we always go back to. So last year, mushroom cordyceps were everywhere. This year, peptides are everywhere. They come and they go. Hopefully they go when we realize there's no research. And if research does come out, it's neutral or negative. And just like longevity, the sad truth is that the things that really work for improving our exercise performance are training, nutrition, and just the very basics of supplementation. Your caffeines, your beetroot juices, maybe your bicarbs, and a couple of others. And the things and the pills that might help you are helping as a cherry on top. They are not forming a foundation of anyone's performance. No athletes got elite because they knew how to use beetroot juice. And so how should we think about supplements and hype going forward? Well, the first one is that animal data is necessary but not sufficient. Mouse studies are great to generate hypotheses, but we don't confirm these in humans. There are just as many studies showing improved endurance in mice as there are showing improved longevity in mice. And so if you hear anyone tell you that we've found something amazing in mice, your immediate next thought should be, but does it do it in humans? And if the answer is we don't know, then you don't have the evidence for that. But even if there is research in humans, quality of evidence is so important. And the quality of evidence within sports science is often very poor. I recently read a meta-analysis that supported the use of mushroom cordyceps for endurance. And when you started to dig down into the actual studies they were using for the meta-analysis, firstly, there were very few. And secondly, the quality of the studies was so poor that it just wasn't enough to really show any convincing benefits to, in this case, mushroom cordyceps. And this comes back to paying attention to who is doing the selling. If it's a supplement company, which it so often is, we've got to remember the skin they've got in the game. And so to be clear, to finish this off, I don't want to talk down on rapamycin or the researchers. The research itself was fantastic. And the science itself in rapamycin is really interesting. Just the same with supplements that I spend my life moaning about on social media. Electrolytes, great example. There's a time and a place for sodium. It's just not in most people's everyday diet, or at least as a supplement. It's about making sure that people that are on social media and taking in this information are getting the best information possible. And so the next time you hear about a supplement that may improve performance, the thing to think about is firstly, is there human data? But secondly, is there high quality human data? Is it placebo controlled? Is it double blind? These kind of things. And I hope that was interesting. I hope it was helpful. Thank you for listening and taking the time to listen to a supplement that you may well not have heard of before, but I hope, as I mentioned at the start, that the story is worth it and there's a nice little lesson in there. I'm now back. I took a few weeks off, just things being very busy, particularly with work. We've got assessments at university right now, so students are very busy, staff are also very busy. But I'm going to be back to my once a week posting schedule now, every Tuesday. And if you've got any suggestions for topics you'd like me to cover, please drop me a message on Spotify or message me on my social medias. Always looking for new topics to cover. But again, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you all next week.